Welcome everyone here to Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter. Seated left to right on our screen is Darin Fredrickson coming to us out of Monterey, California. And then of course, Kyle Torgerson here in studio making all the dials happen. Well, this is the first broadcast of Master Surveillant Mindset here on Northwest Digital News. And it's a pleasure having you on with us here, Darin, to share some great stories and start a beginning of a great adventure here on Northwest Digital News.
Thanks for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to being here.
For our benefit of our viewers, a little bit about Darin. He spent 2 decades in the Phoenix Police Department, retired after a couple decades of work there. He spent a ton of work doing surveillance around the country. He's trained federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies on surveillance and a number of different issues here. I'm looking at this bio here, Darin, and I'm wondering what you haven't done with regard to law enforcement. You did leave a lot of stones unturned here in your law enforcement
Well, when it
career.
came to crime, there's a lot of crime out there, and I pretty much touched every crime there was out there. And on the good side of it, the good sense.
You look a lot younger than you are, so I want you to have share with people kind of what your passion was that led you into law enforcement, and which may help plant the seed for those out there who might be looking at following in the footsteps of somebody like yourself.
Well, when I look back at my youth, I remember living down the street from a main highway, and every time I would hear a siren, I'd run up the street or bike up the street and look to see what went by on that highway. And from a very early age, I just had this inclination towards like the curiosity of crime, and it just was so fascinating to see police cars go by. I'm like, where are they going? What are they doing? I would do that. And then as I got older, I bought a ninja suit, right? And I started sneaking around the neighborhood and scaring my friends and spying, in a good sense, not, peeping Tom or anything, but just when we'd go camping, I'd scare my friends. And so the ninja suit was kind of like the covert watch people without having them find you. And I got chased a couple times and ditched them real quick in the shadow. And so from that point on, then I started lifting weights and got really in shape. And I was wondering, is law enforcement really a career for me? And I was looking to get into business. My family is in the business, and it was a natural progression to just take over the family business. And I thought it's just not exciting enough. So really, if it was all excitement, like I work or live to have fun, and if I'm not having fun, I went on. And I spent 20 years and I was having fun the day I left Phoenix, but I continued my fun in the private sector doing the same thing I was doing for the government, only now I was doing it for corporations and private individuals. So that's kind of what propelled me into my career. And it's just, I just thrive on that excitement and that sneak and peek. And it's really a game. It's good versus evil. And that's what keeps me going every single.
That's fantastic. I'm sitting here looking at your bio. I see 25 years of surveillance experience and thousands of physical and electronic surveillances, including private, corporate, and criminal cases, including homicides, drug and human trafficking, organized retail crime, burglary, robbery, auto theft, and fraud. One of the there's a number of these that I'd have questions for you, but one that I wanted to touch on real quickly: organized retail crime. This is a subject that you've written a lot about. You've had articles in PI, the Private Investigator magazine, regarding organized retail crime. And this is something that impacts every single business that's out there that's selling to the public. This is hitting them. I'm amazed at how crafty and well organized some of these places are. What are some of the really significant deals that you've seen and been involved in which groups of people are just fleecing targeted retailers of goods day after day?
Well, you mentioned the cost, and the last time I looked, the average cost to every purchaser in the U.S. is $450 extra per year to cover theft. Because if you didn't know, retailers pass their theft losses on to the consumer.
I just want to be clear on there. So as consumers, our additional cost, my personal additional cost, is $450 a year because of people who are stealing from the store.
You bet. Yep. It's called shrinkage in the industry, and those shrinkage costs are passed on to the consumer. So what may have cost you $1.50 Next year might cost you $1.60 or $1.75 because their theft rate is higher, and so thus they're going to pass it on. So everything would be cheaper if we didn't have retail theft. And you mentioned the volume of it. It's actually exponentially growing every single year as law enforcement becomes more strapped for resources, and criminals find opportunities to make easier money. And it's not necessarily easier, but the loopholes they use, and I'm not going to tell anybody the loopholes because the criminals kind of figure it out on their own, but they use some loopholes to avoid prosecution a lot of times. And so what I've done over the years with the police department and even privately is I've closed those loopholes by being able to travel and actually watch these individuals, to follow them from store to store, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and then get them charged with felony crimes, not misdemeanors. Because every location's a shoplift, which is generally a misdemeanor, but in reality, they're actually felony crimes, but you got to put them together to establish that felony. And so that's what I've done over the last few years for a couple different corporations.
That makes a lot of sense, though, because, you know, even you take other situations, a lot of people are aware of the $10,000 threshold that sometimes is determined between a misdemeanor crime and a felony crime. And to some extent, it makes sense that there has to be X amount of property or money involved before a felony crime actually sticks on somebody.
Yeah, and they use that to their advantage. They'll just target numerous stores and stay under that threshold. I mean, I see it to where it's within 5 cents of the threshold with some of these groups I'm working, and then they'll just go to the next store and do the same thing. But surveillance allows me to be able to put those individuals at all those stores, whether there's video or not in the stores, and get them charged at a felony level. And yeah, I mean, you could spend hours just going over all the different scams out there. It's amazing. I mean, the reason Costco marks your receipt when you go out the door is so that you don't have your buddy waiting behind you with a full cart with all the same items. So you just slip the receipt back to them and they roll out, and they're called 2-for-1s. That's why stores mark receipts. So that's just one simple example of just one of the many scams that are out there.
So what I want to do is take a little bit of time to walk through, because for the benefit of our viewers here, if you haven't already picked this up, we have the Master Surveillant on the show here today. So what I'd love to have you share, not only for law enforcement that are following the show here today, but also for people who are just kind of interested in what goes into the makings of a surveillance that you would do. One of the questions before we get into some of those nuts and bolts is I want to ask you this question. You're here on the show with us today. You've been on various news networks around the country. You've written a ton of books. I recognize you. A lot of people would recognize you. What things do you do as a professional to make sure that somebody doesn't go, wow, you know that guy, I know where he lives, it puts your family, your loved ones in jeopardy. What things do you do to protect yourself and your own identity in the work that you do?
So what I normally do is maintain distance, and so I don't let them see me. That's the number one objective, is blending in. Don't let them see what I look like. So if I'm in a vehicle, I have the vehicle as cover or camouflage. I use tint, I use screens, and so I don't let them see me. Now, if they do see me, then I have to change things up, my appearance. I carry extra coats, glasses, hats. I usually don't wear a hat in the field, so then I can very quickly put a hat on, put prescription glasses that are non-prescription. The ultimate, depending on how much I've been exposed, is I have about 4 of these masks right here. And these masks are silicone. They're rather expensive. They look maybe a little bit cheesy just on its face value. But when I put a hat and glasses on, maybe I put a hoodie up, I can entirely change my appearance in about 10 seconds. And again, I have about 4 of these. So I avoid anybody seeing me. I avoid eye contact with anybody. And if I do expose myself, then I have to change up my appearance. And in the industry, people may see you, but do they remember you? And that's what you want to do, is not be rememberable.
No, makes a lot of sense. I don't have a photographic memory, but I have something that's close to that. And just some of the things that you've shared, if somebody's around me and they're creating visual stimulus, so to speak. I've had, just even passing through rooms and things that I'm coming in contact with, there's times when my wife will say, hey, I don't know where my keys are. And I will actually like close my eyes and blink, and I will see a picture of, like, you know what, I think it's on the bookcase in the living room. And those,
Sure.
So it's really interesting to me how visually stimulating environments around me can be. And when you talk about being that not memorable person and not being visible to the subject that you're studying, that can be really, really key. Because if you were doing surveillance on somebody like me, as an example, you make one mistake, I'm going to figure out who you are really quickly. And it's just because of how, graphics are definitely one of my areas of learning, and it's one of my areas of expertise. Kyle,
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking about now, if I did this, obviously I can't have a beard, and that kind of makes me sad, but that makes completely sense, just being completely just not memorable.
Yeah. So
no, actually, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Darin.
You can actually have a beard. You can have a beard. One strategy for long-term surveillance operations is actually to grow your hair out, grow a beard, and then if you get compromised, like the quickest thing you do, and it's tough, right? If you like your beard, but that beard goes, or a bigger beard gets really tight, the hair gets cut shorter. So actually going into a surveillance operation, a beard is totally appropriate. It's just whether you're ready to sacrifice that baby if you take a burn or if you take some heat. So yeah, you can, and the better you are, the longer you keep it, right?
Yeah, that's right. You should have seen him a while back, Darin. He had this hair and this beard thing going on that whenever we were anywhere in public, I'd say, all right, Kyle, do your Jesus pose. And you put a white robe on this guy, yeah, people would be minding their P's and Q's around him, that's for sure. So hey, let's talk about obviously your area of expertise, doing surveillance. What would be one of the reasons that you would do it, beyond maybe some of the obvious reasons that people could think about? But why would you conduct a surveillance?
So most people in the private investigation world, most people think of PIs as sneaking around on cheating spouses, and as an area of surveillance to get that confirmation. Usually when a spouse has a suspicion. In government, I literally, like you had mentioned, I've worked almost every type of crime there is, doing this to get evidence and intelligence. So I followed human traffickers out of Arizona to the border, where we had them stopped with 16 people crammed in little minivans. I followed guns to the border in Nogales and Yuma, Arizona. Not anything having to do with Fast and Furious. This was well before that. And we took off the guns at the border. They didn't go into Mexico. From drug traffickers to drug cooks, to violent offenders. I worked the serial criminals in Phoenix, the baseline killer, the serial shooters, the AM rapists, like all those serial cases. Surveillance is a huge part of it. As a matter of fact, in a lot of the homicides, surveillance is used to get DNA from suspects, to match it up to crime scenes, to find out where hidden guns or evidence are located. So I spent 6 months on a homicide drug task force working drug traffickers that were involved in killing people. And the goal was, like in drugs, in case you didn't know, when there's homicides, the witnesses are real hard to find because they just take care of it on the street. But if you have somebody that's out there killing people and they're a drug trafficker, you target them, take them out for drug trafficking, put them in prison, and then they won't kill anybody. But so the reasons that you do surveillance are to gather intelligence and information, and a lot of investigative work relies on that if you utilize it. There's a lot of agencies that actually don't do it because it's time consuming. There's not the resources, and frankly, they're not skilled. I mean, I pretty much learned on the street on how to do it. Read a couple books, but book learning and street smarts are totally different. You can learn fundamentals from a book. I think you mentioned 6 or 7 books, Fundamentals of Physical Surveillance, where it teaches fundamentals of what to do and how to get that evidence and intelligence without taking a burn. That's really what it comes down to.
Describe taking a burn. That's some lingo in your trade that you use. Describe what that means exactly.
So taking a burn, and yeah, you know, the whole cop lingo thing, you get so used to it that you just like and assume everybody knows what a burn is. But if you were to put your hand towards the stove and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and if you touch that stove, you get burned. It's the same thing in surveillance, where if you get too close to your subject, you can take a burn where it's a compromise. They actually have identified you as potentially following them. Now, they don't always know whether you're following them. They're just assuming that. And so if you do take a burn in a surveillance operation, typically you're done. Go turn in your car and go sit at your desk. That's pretty much what happens, because you're not useful anymore. Because if you see somebody one time, that's just an accident, right? If you see them a second time, then it's a coincidence. If you see them a third time, that's pretty much confirmation that that person's following you, especially if it's at 3 different points. So that's what a burn is a compromise, or basically being identified by your subject.
And as anybody knows, thinking about that term, you don't want to get burned. So when's an appropriate place? When's an appropriate time? What kind of triggers the surveillance, which tells you and or other law enforcement, or even somebody, private citizen, what's the trigger point? When should you conduct a surveillance?
So usually you try to exhaust all their investigative means, or the evidence that a surveillance is going to get you will resolve a case quicker or an investigation quicker, or it's just surveillance is the only way to get that evidence. And surveillance really is the only investigative tool that will absolutely tell you where a person is 24 hours a day. If you're doing a 24-hour surveillance, nothing else can do that. Even using GPS trackers, you can track a car, but what does that tell you? Where the car is. It doesn't tell you who's in the car or what's happening at that location. So physical surveillance is the only way to really know everything about your subject 24 hours a day by watching them. So when I worked with career criminals for the repeat offender program surveillance team for Phoenix PD, worked it for 6 or 7 years. We targeted career criminals that we knew they were doing crime, but there was no reports or anything to take them off the street. And generally within 72 hours of locating a career criminal, putting them under surveillance, they would commit a felony crime, and we'd put them in jail. And we involved patrol, so they didn't see who we looked like or know that a surveillance team got them arrested, right? And then when a lot of times they got booked, they get released, right? First time released. If you get them arrested again, second time non-bondable. So we'd actually go to the jail and follow them from jail and watch them do another felony and then put them back in. And then usually they go to prison. So we did that numerous times. Usually about every week we're going to the jail following one of our career criminals. And then the record, I think, was 30 minutes where one of our bad guys got released from jail and stole a car. And I think it was a 30-minute, maybe it was an hour, but still, that just shows you what a career criminal is that's what they do. So yeah.
That makes total sense to me, Darin, because obviously I haven't had any of this kind of exposure that you're talking about, but I was actually in a public establishment one time, a hotel, and a guy came walking in off the street. He was obviously very inebriated, and he couldn't have known who the young lady was behind the counter where I was checking in, but you would have thought for sure that he did. And this lady, had committed some kind of atrocity against him and his family, and he was coming to the counter quite clearly to attack this woman. And I was sitting there in a chair in the lobby, and I see him making this aggressive movement up to the counter, and I just walked between him and the lady at the counter and just put my hand out, and I said, "Sir, you need to go sit down in the chair over there." He walked right into my hand, and he was drunk enough that he tipped over backwards on the floor and his head hits the concrete floor. I mean, I felt kind of bad, like, wow, I didn't mean to hurt this guy or anything. But, then I helped him up and I set him in the chair and I says, as long as you stay there, we could be friends. And I told the gal, I said, just call the police and come get him. You know what kind of blew my mind is the officers walk in the door and they're like, "Hey, Fred, man, why did you have to do this? You just got out of jail. Like when you mentioned 30 minutes ago, it had just been earlier that day. I was just like, wow, you're making really bad choices, aren't you? So
Yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking about when you mentioned that you're following these criminals right out of jail. I don't have the mindset of somebody like that, but it blows my mind that they would leave that environment and the first thing they do is go and, you know, do more crime.
Well, it's a definition of a career criminal, and for any of the watchers out there, the viewers, there's evil in the world. There's people that are basically wired for evil. They're wired for crime, and a career criminal fits the definition. And I spent 7 years following these individuals, watching them steal purses, break into houses, steal cars, do robberies. And I can tell you one thing, probably 80 or 90% of the victims they targeted could have avoided being a victim if they were just aware of what was going on around them. And that's where, that's a situational awareness that I learned in the neighborhood, because when you're in the worst hood of the city trying to watch a drug house, and you got prosts and you got drug dealers that are basically looking for customers in the neighborhood, and they're coming up and looking in your car, you got to use situational awareness, basically be aware of everything going on around you, because you can be a victim in that neighborhood just like anybody else could. And they don't know if you're an undercover cop or if you're just somebody looking to make a street purchase of something. So you really have to be on your toes and pay attention to everything going on around you. Otherwise you will be the victim. And a lot of the detectives I worked with ended up being victims. Some of them got robbed, some of them got carjacked, and not that they could have avoided it, but we're putting ourselves in those environments that most people avoid.
Exactly. I want to get into some operational planning, some of the things that you do in actually setting up a surveillance. Before I do that, though, real quickly, if you could, Kyle's put up a number of the books on the back wall here, books that you've written, either yourself or in conjunction with other authors out there. Talk about what inspired you to become an author and decide to write. You've got a lot of publications out there on the market.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough when I was a kid growing up to have an uncle that was in law enforcement, and then entered the private sector as an leader, and I was kind of his little toy trickster, whatever. He played so many tricks on me, by just uncle tricks, right? Of following me, just doing all these different things, and I actually looked up to him, and I'm like, you know, he was like a role model. And he's written like 14 or 15 books. Well, he had written a bunch of first edition books, and then after he left law enforcement, he wasn't working the street anymore, and so he said, hey, I need to revise these books. We need to update them. Are you willing to partner, and let's go forward and do some second edition revisions? So we did that, and while doing that, other topics came up, such as racial profiling, which usually ties directly back to drug trafficking. Then obviously I worked drug investigation. I work in drug cases. So I'm like, hey, let's do a book on drug investigation. So then we did a book on drug investigation, racial profiling, and those are the two that I kind of spearheaded in conjunction with him. But the other ones were all second editions, where then we brought in new technologies, and the concepts or the fundamentals of surveillance don't generally change with the physical part. Technology enhances it, but the physical surveillance part is the actual most important part, because you can have all the technology in the world, but if you don't have the street skills to implement it, then you're worthless as a skilled surveillant. You just have to have the street smarts. So that's how I ended up writing, and they do take a lot of time. They take a ton of research, and I learned so much through all those books on authoring them. And I'm writing a couple more that I won't get into right now, but they do take a lot of time, but they definitely really enhance your knowledge, and I like researching and reading on it. Surveillance has been my life for 25 years, so anything I can do to learn, that's what I do.
A great inspiration for anybody out there thinking about writing, and a great contribution you've made to other professionals out there in the field that you know, really need some of this background and understanding of how to properly do investigations and that sort of thing. I want to talk about this operational plan. As you know, Darin, I have background in the military myself. I can tell you that this was actually one of the most fun and exciting things that I did in any military planning on any kind of missions that we did. Really, really loved doing the operational planning stages. And then, you know, the military would always say, well, when that plan comes in contact with humans, well, then everything just goes sideways, which required that you think on your feet a little bit too. Let's talk about operational planning and some of the things that you have to do in setting up a good surveillance.
So in the industry, we call it pre-surveillance or recon. And, you know, you mentioned about things going wrong. Like Murphy is guaranteed to be your best friend out there. I mean, like every time something happens, it's like, there's Murphy. I mean, you can be set up in a perfect position to get video of the crime you need, and a truck will pull in front of you and you lose it all. And it's like, there's Murphy. So Murphy's out there all the time, and you have to have that backup plan, but sometimes there isn't because everything's done on the fly. So in pre-surveillance or operational planning, the more you learn about your subject, whether it's a location, a person, the better you are once you go out there. So we do things like virtual recon, where we actually go into Google Maps and Street View, which when I started drug enforcement, that didn't even exist back in the mid 90s. You didn't have that opportunity to walk down the street virtually and look at houses and see where you're going and what you're doing and where you can hide, where you can position your vehicle. So we do a virtual recon of the area, and then you research your subject. You obviously, number one, have to know what they look like. You can use DMV to get photos, but if you can't do that, almost everybody's on social media. Almost everybody's discoverable through the internet. Usually 85% of the time I can find somebody's photo on the internet. So you have to really, really have keen social media or open source intelligence skills to find people. So you research your subject, because the more you know about the behaviors of the person you're going to watch, then you can anticipate. The more you know about their family, the more you know about, do they work out? Do they go to bars at night? Do they have any hobbies? How do they drive? Everything about your subject before you even hit the street, the better you're going to be at holding that subject on a surveillance and not taking it, because you can often anticipate what they're going to do, where they're going to go. You know what their schedule is. You know where they work. You know when their lunch break is. So that is, in my mind and in my experience, absolutely the most important step on a surveillance operation. Now, a lot of times you don't have that. You get a call that says, hey, this is going down at this street corner in 1 hour, and you just go and you set up and you wing it, and you don't have a lot of opportunity. But while you're there set up, then you start researching what you need to research. So that would be the operational planning. And you know, it covers a whole lot of things, like the layout of neighborhoods, exit routes, or ingress, egress into neighborhoods, what most natural route somebody's going to take out of a neighborhood. So all that stuff is really, really critical when you're setting up for a surveillance operation. And then you have to look at how many resources do you have. I've done surveillance on, I was on an 8-person team with the repeat offender program. When you do it privately, you're lucky if you have 2 people. And so you go from an 8-person team. Sometimes when we were working safe burglars that were professional, that had lookouts, that we had 3 teams. We had like 24 surveillance people plus aircraft and tracking, and like that is a massive surveillance operation. And so you have a lot more flexibility. But when you have 1, 2, or 3 surveillance, you know, investigators, your tactics totally changes and your strategies totally change, because you might be the eye and you might be the takeaway vehicle. And so you need to know everything about your neighborhood, everything about the person that you're following that you can, because that makes you successful, and at least minimizes the opportunities for Murphy to come knocking on your window and messing up your surveillance operation. I can tell you this, in almost every surveillance operation, you will lose your subject. Generally, if you're going to lose them, you lose them in the first 30 seconds. And that's remained consistent for 25 years. You spend 2 days on a house Your subject finally leaves, and in 30 seconds, they make a light, they hit a freeway, they're gone.
And all that time invested, you're like, hey, wait.
Oh, been there, done that so many times. Yep. That's the realities of it.
Something I want to bounce off of you, because when you mention about this virtual recon and the subject research that you're doing, when I was in, I can't remember if I was in my sophomore or junior year in high school, I spent a good chunk of a summer and actually part of a school year out on my uncle's farm, and they had dairy cattle out there, and we're cleaning the barn out one day, and he makes this comment to me. He says that, the cows leave the barn at the same time every day. I wrote about this in my book. The title of that chapter was "Get Off Your Fence Line," and it came out of this experience. He's telling me, the cows leave the barn at the same time every day. They walk down the same fence line. They munch on the same grass. They come back to the barn at the same time. They eat the same 8 pounds of grain. And I, just being a little bit of a smart aleck and having a sense of humor, I go, oh, so when they lift their tail, it's same shit, different day. And he says, yeah, pretty much. And that actually got me to think as a young person that are human beings just like a cow? Do we get up at the same time, go down the same fence line, come back at the same time, do the same stuff? That was actually an eye-opening experience for me growing up as an adult. And this virtual recon you're doing in the subject search, how many times are these perps or these subjects actually walking down the same fence line? That makes your job easier, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. No, and that's why the longer you get into a surveillance operation and the more you learn about your subject, the less opportunity there is to take a burn, because you literally, like, you want to talk about the opioid epidemic. Heroin addicts, their bodies are on a very, like, regimented structure on when the drug starts, waning in their effects, and so they need another drug. And so I literally can set my watch with a heroin addict once I learn their pattern over a couple of days. And heroin addict takes 2 days, and I know their pattern. But drugs aside, people are creatures of habit, just like you said. They're like cows, man. They drive the same way out of a neighborhood. They stop at the same Starbucks. They go to the same grocery store. And so once you learn their habits, then your job is so much easier, where they leave in the morning, and the first day you don't know where they're going. Oh, they're going to drop their kid off at childcare, but you didn't know where it was. Now you know where it is. Now you don't even have to set up at the home necessarily, or you set up at the house, but you know they're going to childcare first. So if you lose them, you know where to pick them up, or you just set up at the childcare and wait for the kids to get dropped off and then follow them from there. So you are 100% right. They are creatures of habit. It's just how fast can you learn their habits and get the evidence and intelligence you need. So you're dead on with that. Absolutely. We are creatures of habit.
People that, practice day after day, week after week, and everything's inside the box, inside those habits. You can't expect to go into your career or into your workplace and be this creative genius when you've been an inside the box thinker with absolutely everything else you do. In a really strange sort of sense, Darin, that's one of the reasons why when I go to a restaurant, I make the waiter pick me something and they can't tell me what they're bringing me. It's simply because if I open the menu, I would probably select something I'm familiar with or something I think I like. And in small ways, I'm teaching my brain it's okay to be surprised. And it allows me to think outside the box when it actually really counts. So they're small little tricks, but man, get off that fence line. Yeah. Hey, I have a really quick question that I want to bounce off of you. This comes from one of our viewers, is what do we need to do to catch the thieves that have been hitting our neighborhood for months, taking belongings from cars and breaking into the homes of elderly? Sometimes cars are locked and they still get in without causing any damage. How does somebody catch somebody like that in their own neighborhood?
Man, we worked so many groups that did nighttime car burglaries. Generally, they're most likely they're drug addicts, and they're looking for valuables that they can sell to support a drug habit. And sometimes you can tell by what items are taken. But number one, I would say, don't leave any valuables in the vehicle. Mm-hmm. I'm over cautious anywhere I go, and my whole family will attest to it. Like, it's cover your purse, and even if you put it in your trunk, like, make sure nobody's watching you. Never leave a valuable in a vehicle unless you want it to get stolen. And Cameras are great. I have cameras on my house, and cameras are relatively cheap, especially the Wi-Fi based, like the Nest Cam, or they used to be called drop cams, but Nest Cam. Set it up. At least you'll get video. Now, a lot of times, your suspects aren't going to be identifiable about video, or identifiable off of video, but it's one step in the right direction. So, but the number one thing to not be a victim is to not have anything for them to steal. Did you say they're going into houses too, or just cars?
Elderly homes and vehicles, yes.
Okay. Okay. So I would want to know if it's daytime or nighttime. That would help, because nighttime is generally vehicles outside and commercial burglaries. Daytime is usually residential burglaries when people are away or at work. So that's tough. Like, burglars travel too. They don't just necessarily live in a neighborhood. They target expensive or more exclusive neighborhoods just because that's where there's more valuables. So those are tough. I mean, that's one of the joys of our job, was we went after those people and watched them. And at night we called them garage surfers, and they literally will drive neighborhoods looking for open garages. And most criminals, I'm telling you, they're looking for opportunity. So all you do is take the opportunity away and let it be the next person. And that's how you can protect yourself, your family, and your own personal property. So,
for people who only protect the security of their garage with a garage door opener, I want to share a really quick story with you on this. I was actually had a friend of mine in a vehicle with me, and I had a garage door opener on my garage. I stopped leaving my garage secured only with the opener after this experience, because we were in a major city area, and he told me, he said, Kevin, there are so many codes and frequencies on those openers. He goes, it's virtually impossible to have anybody have the same code as your garage door opener. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. We're driving through the main drag through a residential area here, and I start hitting the button after every single house we go. We did this for about an hour and a half because it became curious and even funny for me. But I opened up 5 garage doors in an hour and a half time with my own garage door opener. I went, holy smokes, I'm putting that bolt on the door tonight. And I'm going to make sure my doors are properly secured whenever I'm away. This is not good security.
absolutely. And whether you have a garage door opener or not, I can pretty much get into most garages probably in about 10 seconds if you know the technique. And there's a very, very simple solution to not having people get into garages, because I worked a group at night that was using this tool, and they were opening up garages. So I'll just give you a little hint. That little rope that's hanging, the emergency release on the garage inside, just throw and loop it over the top of that track that opens your garage door. If you just loop it over, you'll prevent burglars that use that one strategy at least for getting in. And I did that. Why? Because what are the chances of you getting burglarized? Probably pretty slim. But when do people get burglar alarms? After the fact, right? When they probably won't even ever be targeted again. But you just take precautions, because precautions prevent opportunity. That's a good story, though. That's yeah, we worked a group that had a whole bunch of garage door openers, and that's all. They would drive around and just push garage door openers, and they were looking for open garages, so they had it covered on both ends. And there's strategies involved in getting them guys, but it was a lot of fun doing it.
A gentleman that I talked to on one show told me that his home security system consisted of 2 ginormous dog dishes sitting on the front porch that were empty, a sign that he put on the door that said, please don't open the door, Duke and Rufus are in bad mood today. And then below the thing, there's a size 23 pair of boots sitting there on the porch. And then the sign said, back in 5 minutes, just went to town to get more ammunition.
There you go. The boots are great. The dog bowls are great. The signs are great. No, absolutely. It's just those little things that will make that criminal that's looking for that opportunity just say, I think I'll pass on this one. Why? Because there's thousands more that there's most likely not those risks to them, because that's their occupation. And the more occupational hazard that is created for them, the less likely they're going to take on that job, right? They're going to move to an easier job.
I actually had, I learned this in the military, but I actually had others that even shared this with me as well. And this was feedback from people that are targeting neighborhoods. you have like a National Guard or a Army sticker or a NRA member sticker or things like that on the backs of your vehicles or anywhere around your home. And there again is somebody going, oh no, that guy's probably got a gun. Let's go to the next place. So a lot of really simple things that people can do to be prepared. But you said something back when you were talking about operational planning, and you mentioned the words situational awareness. A really good thing for everybody in our viewing audience is that a lot of people, and I'm kind of curious what in your experience, a lot of people who are targeted by these situations or by crime are simply because they aren't paying any attention to their own environments, and they allow themselves to become a victim. Is that a fair statement, Darin?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the purse snatchers we followed, they looked for, like when you saw somebody come out of a grocery store, you knew that they're going to target this person. And like if we knew they were going to target them, the criminal is most likely going to target them. And it was all on the person, and generally they were more elderly people. Why? Because they pose less risk, right? They're not going to fight as much, but just their lack of awareness. The worst thing was the ones that were coming out like this, or they're pushing their cart and they are paying absolutely no attention. And so and that's where I really learned it with the purse snatchers, and then the AM rapist who was targeting young female joggers, that they were doing things out of habit that were creating opportunities for the predator, like not locking their windows, not locking their doors. But yeah, like the purse snatchers is where I really saw how easy it was. And I was actually really upset. We worked a purse snatcher crack addict in Phoenix that ended up stealing purses off of two elderly women, and they had both fallen down on the ground, and they actually died. Two women. One was from Minnesota, and that like created in me like this passion, like, you know, dude, you are going down, man, because they died, and their spouses that were with them, elderly people, maybe I don't know, they're not, their memory maybe is not as good, their eyesight isn't as good, they're not paying attention as much, and so they're just easier targets. Mm-hmm. And so he actually had, but we couldn't prove that he did those homicides because of the witnesses. They just couldn't identify him. But when we ended up doing surveillance on him, and he would target vehicles with handicap plates or handicap placards from grocery stores, follow him all the way home. And I actually have that video. We could show it on a later show of him getting taken down, because the faces are far enough away where you won't see any of the investigators that were undercover. But we had 2 aircrafts and 2 teams on this guy, and we followed the suspect. Basically, he would target a victim, start following him. We would quickly run the victim's license plate, find out their address, get set up on their house with investigators, and then when she would roll in and she would park and come out of the vehicle, that's when he would run up and grab the purse and flee. And so that was a strategy we utilized. But all the victims he targeted, you could just see that they were targets because of their lack of situational awareness, and also the fact that they just held themselves, like how you hold yourself, your posture and your eye contact, and if you project confidence, most likely you won't become a victim. Why? Because you're too much of a challenge for a criminal. Mm-hmm. They're predators, and they look for easy prey. So I know I went off on a tangent on a story there, but man, I'm telling you that, you know, died because of this guy stealing their purses, and he could never be charged for those homicides because we didn't have enough proof, but we knew he did it. It was just the MO was the same, left a grocery store, happened in the driveway. And so those things really get your fighting spirit up. That's why I do what I do, is just to fight that evil out there.
That's amazing. Hey, can you answer one quick question? Question from Raven over on Twitch is, what's the average salary of this work for somebody who's wanting to look at this as a career? What would be a typical salary expectation?
So it depends if you work in government or private. If you go the government route, you have to go through the same route that a patrol officer. I mean, I did my time in patrol, and fortunately, as soon as I was eligible to become detective, I went to drug enforcement, and spent the rest of my career as a detective. So the is really a detective, at least where I worked, there wasn't a promotion. You didn't get any more money. But like, at least in the agency I worked for, it was right around 80,000 a year or so, not counting overtime. And I can tell you every detail I worked was, there was probably more overtime than we could even work because of what we did. On the surveillance team, we were one of only a handful, like of 3 surveillance teams on the whole department. And just to let you know, like, the surveillance teams are, well, I better not say that. So, okay. Anyways, the surveillance teams, you make the same amount as a patrol officer at the same level. You maybe get a bonus for extra money for clothing. I always like, if you're a detective, you get extra uniform allowance so you can wear suits, because you know you have to wear suits as a detective. But the undercover guys get the same allowance, and you're pretty much wearing shorts and t-shirts and tank tops and jeans, and that's what I wore for 16 years of my career, is shorts, t-shirts, and in Arizona you could get away with that. So, but in the private sector, it really depends on what your niche is, or niche, on what type of investigations you do. If you go into retail, for example, retailers vary in what they pay, but the top retailers that pay for organized retail crime investigators, it's probably right around 75 to 85,000. Some are lower, 40 to 50,000. It really varies. But again, in a retail type investigative role, you have to start on the floor catching shoplifters, and then go into management, and you still have to work your way up. So no matter where you go, you still have to pretty much cut your teeth on the floor in retail, on the street as a patrol officer. But what I would recommend is the cyber world right now. The cyber crime going on right now is just, it's really blowing up all over the place. And so if you have any logical side to your brain, or you're more left-sided and you like all the technical stuff with cybercrime, there's endless opportunity in cybercrime, and it's only going to grow. So if that's an excellent route to go. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit at a desk all day just doing cybercrime, because I would go nuts. I have to be out on the street, or at least balance it. But so I don't know if that helps. It really, there's really a broad range. Private investigators, again, it's a very, very competitive field, unless you find a niche and work it. And that's where you can make really good money, because you specialize in that area.
And like any field, there's plenty of people in the field that aren't that great at what they do. And so you spend the kind of time and research and learning that you have, and the investment you put into your career, and maybe you can be a master surveillant someday too. So, hey, I want to close with this, Darin. How valuable, over your career in law enforcement and as a master surveillant, how valuable has physical fitness been to what you do professionally?
Well, I used to have a picture at my desk when I was working drug enforcement, and it was some of you mean it's a guy in prison working out, doing a back pull down on a machine, and he's just ripped and shredded, and he's a con. He's not even an ex-con. He's in prison. But those are the guys that are getting out, that are doing that type of crime. So I was motivated to basically be able to hold my own, and I'm a big guy anyways, but if I ever got in a street fight, and I've been in a few over the years, nothing bad, but I've been in a few, but I de-escalate a lot of those situations that could have been fights too. So physical fitness, the stamina, and I can tell you right now, even just being able to follow somebody on foot, or maybe run. I had a case up in northern Arizona where I set myself up in a position on a mountaintop, and all of a sudden they were loading up the car to leave, and I literally had to run like 3/4 of a mile to get to my car to follow them out, because I didn't anticipate them leaving. If I didn't have the physical fitness level, and I should do more cardio, I'm more into the lifting part of it, but that physical fitness really helps, because it not only within the strength part of it, but the mental sharpness, the focus, the energy, that's where it really comes in, is just having your body running at an optimum level. So like when I worked drug enforcement, I worked out and hiked pretty much every day before my shift, because I worked a night shift or afternoon, And so I had that energy just to push me through that night. And I ate clean as well too, so that helps to cut down on all that sugar and everything. But physical fitness has always been a part of my life. And it's funny, actually, when I went into the academy, actually before I even went to the academy, when I was going through the process, I was bodybuilding since I was like 15 years old. So I had a lot of muscle and I was really lean. And I went in there, met my background investigator, and he's asking all these questions. Have you ever drank alcohol, used drugs and all that? I'm like, no, 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 no. He's like, is all that red meat real? I go, what do you mean? He goes, you haven't done steroids or anything, have you? I said, absolutely not. He goes, you know, you got to take a lie detector test. I go, bring it on. But I had so much size on me, he thought I took steroids. Well, no, I was dedicated, committed. Well, then the academy runs all that off. I had a sergeant in the academy who was a marathon runner. What do you think we did for exercise? We stinking ran and ran and ran. So I went from like 210 pounds going into the academy. When I graduated, I think I was 195. And wow. I mean, it burned all the muscle off. Granted, I was really in the best shape of my life, but I've always valued physical fitness, and I still do, because it helps you do your job. It keeps you focused, and yeah, it's part of my life. So
then real quickly, for victims of crimes that you have witnessed under surveillance, how valuable would a higher level of fitness been to them?
Well, yeah, so what fitness does, though, is it gives you confidence, it gives you posture. Like I had mentioned, a predator targets prey, it targets weak prey. Mm-hmm. What lifting weights and exercise does is it strengthens your muscles, it helps your posture, and so you actually have more confidence, and you what's the word I'm looking for? You project confidence.
Yeah,
and
you exude confidence
is the best thing you can.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. So that's the best thing. Just the confidence it gives you of feeling good, having energy, and being more alert. It's not necessarily the physical part of it, like I'm going to fight an assailant, because I don't mm-hmm. recommend anybody fighting an assailant over a robbery or a burglary. I mean, that's just not necessary. But
sure.
But absolutely, it just exudes that confidence.
It's really that aura that's around you as a result of your commitment to fitness. So that's kind of what I wanted to make sure that people were aware of. Well, thanks, Darin, for all the time. We took a lot more time from you today than we promised that we would. I really appreciate you sticking around and sharing all the great information that you did. And a great thing to look forward to even for our viewers out there. Darin, you mentioned about all the video that you have. We are going to absolutely love and look forward to sharing some of this content from our people, because they're going to get to see some real live takedowns happen with some of these perpetrators and learn more about not only surveillance but personal safety, situational awareness, how not to become victims of crime, and all of that kind of good stuff. So, hey, before we leave, you want to give a little shout out to your media person out of Arizona who said, hey, don't forget us little people.
Yeah, Sybil Hoffman. We've done some programs together, and Sybil, I love you out there, and you're one of those Minnesota strongholds, and I hope you have the opportunity to watch this, and I hope it meets your standards, and I hope I didn't let you down.
Very good. All right, well, thanks to everybody who joined us here on the broadcast on Twitch TV, on Patreon, and YouTube, and of course our Facebook pages. And special thanks to Darin Fredrickson for joining us here on Master Surveillant Mindset. I hope you learned a lot from the show. On behalf of myself, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson, till next time, take care.